Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Wellness Wednesday, brought to you by Minneapolis.St.Paul Magazine and our dear friends at Northwestern Health Sciences University. Summer is such a fleeting season in our Minnesota climate, so we hope that y'all are seizing the days, hot and muggy as they may be, while obeying the air quality advisories out there, because that's like a real situation. So today we're going to pair some of that heat with some fascinating education that we will bake into our brains, and then eventually our stomachs, if you catch my drift. Gut health is all the rage these days. It's just so awkward to say out loud, but it's true. It has been for the past couple of years, 3 to 5 years or so, as we learn more about our guts and the brain connection, the second brain, and then how we are what we eat. And that old trope is pretty much just as true as ever these days. The state of our stomachs is a pretty powerful thing, and it just doesn't feel sufficient to just describe ourselves as being full or hungry when we know that our stomachs, that our guts are capable of doing so much more than just breaking down and digesting our food. Our gut bacteria produces gads and gads of neurochemicals that the brain uses to regulate things like mental processes, and then it manufactures a lot of our daily serotonin, which obviously it affects our GI activity, but it also affects our moods. So it's a pretty big influencer when it comes to our day-to-day beings. And over the past few years, we've partnered with Dr. Paul Ratte. He's today's guest, on a couple of articles that have been geared towards gut health and probiotics and prebiotics and antibiotics and much more. And he's actually the one, he's taught me a lot over the years. I was just telling him that during our tech run through. But one of them was the pro tip of switching to plain Greek yogurt, which is kind of gross if you're used to the sugary fruit flavored stuff. Now we have like chocolate in our yogurt, and I sometimes have the culinary, what's the word? I basically eat like a teenage boy at times. So he told me to start with putting some of the sugary yogurt into the plain Greek yogurt, and then kind of weaning out the sugary stuff over time. And it's actually worked. And just like kombucha, which I thought was absolutely disgusting and appalling at first sip, I crave it now. You get used to it, your palates adapt. But what I love about Paul is that while his functional, medicine teachings lend to this extraordinary encyclopedic mind of his, he's also really gifted at giving practical tips, which is obviously super important when you explore a broad topic like gut health, which is, heavily steeped in journals and scientific literature and the like. I became really invested in my own gut health after overcoming a drug-resistant bacterial infection, 10, 12 years ago, which sadly seems to be kind of a growing trend. Antibiotic resistance, that's been marked as a serious public health threat, thanks to our culture's tendency to sort of medicate, overprescribe. So today, Dr. Ratte is going to sort of, delve into the gut health spectrum, because there's just so much to be explored, hitting on everything from probiotics to antibiotics and gut bacteria to fermented foods. And then there's even more where that came from. So make sure that he's hit him up with all of your questions. He's an excellent resource, and he's a busy guy. So this is really prime opportunity that we have here today. But real quick, before we fully dive in, Northwestern Health Sciences University is a leading chiropractic school in the Midwest. They're based out of Bloomington. They have the Bloomington Clinic, which is open to the public, and they offer all sorts of natural healthcare services, from massage to cupping, there's more like Chinese medicine and all that. And then one quick housekeeping item, you guys, be sure to drop all of your comments, your questions in the Q&A box, and then we will do our best to get around to all of them during the next 53 minutes. So now today's speaker is, as I mentioned, Paul Ratte. He's a naturopathic doctor, and he's an assistant professor from the university who specializes in functional medicine. Among his specialties are clinical nutrition, metabolic detoxification. There's a lot of syllables in this, Paul Ratte. Carbohydrate balancing, autoimmune disease, inflammatory bowel disease, and so much more. So with that, thank you for joining us today, Dr. Ratte.
Sure. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the kind words.
Absolutely. I've meant everything that I've said. Me and Paul have partnered on, I think, like 2 or 3 articles over the years. And like I said, you guys, this is prime opportunity, because he's so wonderful and has a knack for distilling kind of complicated information into, things that we can understand, and does that in a way where, when you understand things, you feel empowered to take action. So not every doctor has that skill. So with that, Paul, I'm going to just jump into the first question. And that is, as I was saying before, gut health has become, it seemed like it was sort of a trendy thing for a while, but really there's so much coming out over the past, even 50 years. And it's so commonplace that, it's not just medical terms, like this is the mainstream. So if someone talked about their gut health to somebody else, say 20, 15 years ago, those words would have likely drummed up some laughs or confusing looks. So I want to know, how do we get to a point where gut health is such a hot topic nowadays?
So, I've been in practice for 23 years, and I would say that, we've been talking gut health. I've been talking gut health ever since I started school. So that would have been 27 years ago. Plus, I knew I had gut problems when I was 22. So now I'm going back like 30 years. So I think that what happens, though, is a tipping point, right? I think that gut health is something, well, I'm not going to do anything about it until there's a problem, right? And so then maybe we have the, people that have problem like gluten, for example, right? Gluten intolerance has exploded in the last 15 years. And not that we didn't know about it 23 years ago or 30 years ago with celiac disease and this kind of thing, but more and more people are having issues with that, right? So this is kind of this gut resilience is decreased, right? Meaning that more and more people are saying, hey, wow, maybe I can't eat gluten, maybe I can't drink dairy products. And we also take the gut for granted, right? So it's just something that we just assume that we eat it, we digest it, and things just work fine, right? People won't do anything until there's a problem, right? Again, my story is, I would have had irritable bowel syndrome if I went to a doctor and talked about it when I was 15, but then I'm 20 years old and 22 years old, and I go to Japan, and I live in Japan for 6 months, and all of a sudden all my digestive symptoms disappeared, right? Did I even know that I had any? Well, I knew that I had them when I didn't have them, right? So this was kind of this idea that, oh, it's just normal to be bloated. Oh, it's normal to have a bowel movement every 3 days. This is just the way that I work. Or, my stomach's a little touchy. Instead of just being touchiness or constipation, we get to this level like, well, wait a minute, there's a whole lot of things going on in that digestive tract. And now that we know that it influences your immune system, it influences your mood, it influences your detoxification pathways. So there's all these things that kind of come as a result of that, right? So this, again, idea of the microbiome, right, which is basically, your bacteria, and we've got a fancy name, but the microbiome research has blown up in the last 20 years, right? Whereas we've been talking about yogurt for a long period of time, and that, well, maybe eating some yogurt is good for your GI tract, but now we're actually asking the question, well, why is that, right? And what are the influences? So we're, taking more of a scientific approach to something that was kind of like, maybe we'd call it, what your mom or your grandma told you, right? She just say, well, we do this, or, we do this, and this is the way we eat, and, this kind of thing. So I think we're to this point that we just can't take it for granted any longer, and that we're maybe more in tune that there's something wrong and there's something that I can do about it, right? That's what I get interested in is it under your control, right? What can you do that influences these things? So I guess that's my answer.
Yeah. Paul, do you think that people are more compelled to be transparent about their symptoms at the doctor's office than they were, say, and I mean, this is anecdotal. I know we don't have anything to back this up, but just based off of what you're saying, this has always been an issue, and you don't know what you're dealing with until you're removed from the situation, and it's kind of like the rule of elimination, like you were saying about
Right.
your issues here and then going to Japan and being perfectly fine. But do you think that's part of it, and we just maybe need to be more empowered about going there with our doctors and saying, hey, I'm not regular, or
Yeah, I think that
really
I
question
think that
that?
it's partly in the conventional scheme of things, we need a diagnosis for it, right? So conventional medicine really looks on what do you have and what can we do about it? So we're going to diagnose this, and then we've got a solution for this, right? Whether it's a drug, whether whatever. But the idea is that, but is there, I have irritable bowel syndrome, right? I mean, irritable bowel syndrome, any diagnosis that has syndrome on it means it's kind of a junk pill diagnosis. That's not a bad thing. It means it's a collection of symptoms that tend to co-migrate, right? And now we have the way that we can actually diagnose irritable bowel syndrome that's constipation dependent or diarrhea dependent, right? So we have these subtypes. And partly that diagnosis comes from the fact that we're seeing that, right? So that there's more people that are complaining of these GI issues, and we look for inflammatory bowel disease, and we don't see ulcerative colitis, and we don't see Crohn's disease. So it's not inflammatory, but there's still something going on, something functionally going on. So we kind of put this syndrome on it, and we say, well, what do we do about it? Well, and the idea that, oh, well, maybe you could take a probiotic, right? But there's not a lot of good Western approaches that say, here are the things that you can do from a hygiene perspective to improve the gut, right? And that's kind of my training, is to kind of say, well, I'm really interested in the function, like what's underlying the disease process, right? And that gets into a big gray area because it's not black and white. You're like, oh, well, just take a probiotic and everything will be better, right? Whereas I've seen people get worse on a probiotic, and you think, wow, that's like low stakes insurance policy. Why would somebody get worse on that? Again, there's that individuality to it, but that's, again, trying to listen to somebody's story to say, how do you digest your food? Are you having regular bowel movements? What is going on in that gastrointestinal tract?
Right. And Paul, you say, I mean, if I were to go to a Western doc, there many, I'm not going to generalize, but are quick to take those symptoms, group them together into something that they can name, that they can assign it to. Just like, IBS, isn't that just symptomatic? Isn't that, like you said, like a kind of a checklist? Like, these are the symptoms I'm experiencing, but we don't know for sure if that's what I have. And maybe that's just kind of a nebulous term. So what I want to know is, if I were to go, say I've had stomach issues for a while, they're like, oh, you have IBS. And I'm like, great, now what? And nothing that I'm doing is working. And I just, I think a lot of people might accept that, and not understanding that is kind of lessening your quality of life, and it can get better. So say that I take it upon myself to go see you, a functional medicine doctor. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, but can you share a little bit more about what that appointment would be like when I'm coming to you with, like, I'm constipated, I have diarrhea, or, one or the other? What can you do for me?
Right. So I will say that I see a lot of chronic digestive disorders, right? Because I do think that that's kind of this gray area that conventional medicine is not really good at saying, here, take this makes it better, right? And in fact, if you have ulcerative colitis or something, they give you powerful anti-inflammatories that will help with the inflammation, may not treat the cause, but there's something there to treat, right? Whereas the IBS piece being, well, just kind of live with it. Or if it gets so bad, we can do this, or, this kind of thing, or we're managing kind of the symptoms instead of really digging down into it. So, I mean, from a functional perspective, there's kind of this mnemonic that goes around. It's the 4 R's. And I think it's a good way. Some people would say 5 R's, some people even say 6 R's. But the 4 R's, kind of the basic, is remove, replace, reinoculate, repair. So remove means remove something that doesn't belong there, right? So that could be food sensitivities, right? Food allergies. And we can get into a whole, gray area about, is a food allergy really exist and how do we diagnose it, right? And it's a big gray area. But so that would be something to remove. Other things would be if you have some kind of bacterial overgrowth, right? So SIBO, for example, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, is a rather popular thing in functional medicine world these days. Even conventionally will identify that. But that's like a bacterial overgrowth, and we need to go in there and kind of remove that, right? So that's kind of this remove phase. Replace would be to replace things that you should be producing that help improve digestion, right? So we produce, for example, hydrochloric acid. And hydrochloric acid can be really important for protein digestion, yet, I mean, how many millions of Americans are taking acid blocking drugs for reflux or heartburn or things that are going on in that upper GI? And the idea is that, well, let's just block the stomach acid because that's causing the symptoms. I'm not saying that the stomach acid isn't contributing to that, but it actually could be that you have low stomach acid and you don't have a good sphincter, your valve between your esophagus and your stomach's not working so well. So in fact, some people actually do better taking hydrochloric acid, or even taking, for example, digestive bitters. If you think about that, the Swedish bitters, people would, the Swedes would take a little shot of Swedish bitters before they eat a meal, because those bitters engage that digestive tract, right? They engage that upper GI. Really, really helpful, right? Really kind of simple things. Other things would be working with fat digestion, right? So this is bile acids, and I get really interested in this. There's this fancy pathway called enterohepatic circulation, that your liver makes bile, and the bile is there that actually helps improve fat digestion, and then it actually kind of battles the microbiome and makes the microbiome stronger. So this is something else, that bile salts are important, right? So they play a role in that. That's something you could replace, right? So these are things that are in the replace piece. Then the next R is the reinoculate. So now we're talking about the probiotics, right? Both the probiotics and the prebiotics. Probiotics mean we're taking bacteria that's quote unquote commensal. Commensal meaning that that's something we would actually find in your GI tract. There's also other bacteria, kind of spore forming bacteria, that isn't commensal, so it doesn't actually live in your GI tract, but it actually helps your digestive tract become stronger, right? It helps improve the microbiome without necessarily living in the microbiome itself. So those are kind of probiotics. Prebiotics would be kind of things that we use to feed the good bacteria. So that's like inulin and fructooligosaccharides. Those are things. This is the FODMAPs. If we talk about FODMAPs, so those are fermentable carbohydrates that actually can feed the microbiome. And those FODMAPs could be a good guy or a bad guy, right? Because if you have bad bacteria and you go ahead and take a prebiotic to feed that, now you're feeding bad guys that are living there. And we'd rather maybe say, well, we need to deal with those bad guys instead of feeding, putting more food on the table, right, so to speak, right? So anyway, so that's reinoculate, right? And again, probiotics, very beneficial. I would say, good hygiene, good insurance policy for your GI tract, but I don't know that that's going to fix it in and of itself. And then eating fermented foods, right? So kombucha and sauerkraut, raw sauerkraut, kimchi, this kind of thing. So that's the reinoculate. And then repair means that we can do kind of targeted support for that gastrointestinal lining. And that the GI tract's kind of one of these cell types, the cell type of the GI tract, it turns over all the time, right? Every 6 days. So your red blood cells, your white blood cells, your gastrointestinal tract constantly is regenerating itself. This is why, for example, in chemotherapy patients, why it's really important to support that digestive system, because chemotherapy, for example, chemotherapy does affect rapidly producing cells, right? Cancer cells, but it also affects red blood cells, white blood cells, and also the gastrointestinal tract. That's why we see so many GI problems with chemotherapy. So again, doing some things to kind of nourish or support that lining of the GI tract, right? So that's like, amino acids and then things that can kind of calm that down and really help with that. So that's kind of the simplistic overview. Of course, when I see somebody, I spend a long time in that first visit because I need to know their story and I need to know the context. But really, that's kind of the thought process to think about, like, what are the things you could do to support that digestive function?
I think that's great, Paul. And I think that a lot of people, I'm speaking on behalf of the general population, but it's nice to have a checklist, like something concrete to look at and to take notes and to kind of learn from, versus going to a one-off appointment. And then, going from that to the 4 R's template. I know that you said that in that initial appointment, you spend a lot of time because you're learning about, the whole body health and the history, behind that individual. But would you say, and maybe this is kind of an open-ended question, but after that first consultation, and then you kind of assign them, the 4 R's, is there sort of a sequencing of appointments that happen after that? Or obviously you need to
Yeah.
be patient too, right? Because you go to a Western doctor, they'll tell you to take a probiotic and to, watch what you eat and see if there's patterns. And you go to a doctor like yourself, you're kind of equipped with, like, this is your homework, and we need to kind of spend some time understanding, what's going on here and what are potential triggers and how we can sort of modify diet and habits and things like that.
Yeah, the
So
thing is when
I guess, what does that funnel kind of look like? I'm just trying to sort of paint the picture for a functional medicine patient, if it exists.
yeah, so when the patient comes back and says, well, the dog ate my homework, right? Like,
Yeah.
so there's a
I
fair
just never
amount of
did it.
bargaining and negotiation that goes into clinic visits, right? So, I mean, I can sit in my ivory tower and say, don't eat this, don't do this, do this, do this. And, I actually come from a family of engineers, right? So I got an engineer brain, and I went the doctor route, right? I loved industrial engineering. Like, I'm like this systems thinker. But I also am fully aware that when we have a system or we have something that we're working with, if we change 30, 6 variables at one time, do I know which one's making a difference? Right. So the idea is that maybe we take things one step at a time. Maybe we do more things at once, depending on where people are at and where we're trying to go. I mean, food sensitivity, food allergy is a big deal, right? And I'm going to say that this is a huge thing. And, I can do testing, for example, to test for food sensitivities, but the tests that I use are not perfect. I know this from just experience that it may help, but it may not be a perfect test. Do we do an elimination diet first where you just kind of cut out all these foods and people will be like, well, I can't do that. And then sort of there's bargain and negotiation. Well, you can't do that. Well, why can't you do that? Right. So there's kind of this piece in it. And I, of course, can do supplements, right? I could give you a probiotic. I can give you digestive enzymes. I can give you kind of a leaky gut formula, right? And people will be like, oh, great. I'll take those. That's easy because I can still eat at McDonald's and take my leaky gut support and my probiotic and I'm good to go. Maybe, right? I mean, you could do that, but more than likely, this is a hygiene issue, right? And hygiene is about the things that you do on a regular basis, right? And I mean, I look at it on some level, I think that life is a gift, health is a choice. And choice is threefold. It's what you think, how you move, what you eat, right? So I mean, what you think actually has a lot of influence on this. It's funny though, what you eat may influence what you think, but the what you eat part is a very important aspect to this. And again, what you can eat may not be the same as what other people can eat, right? You're like, well, I can't eat gluten, but somebody else can, and I'm just going to eat gluten because I want to eat gluten, right? I'm like, that's fine, but let's do an experiment where you can tell me, like, you have to tell me that this makes a difference rather than me say, well, here you go, here's the supplement that can work with that, right? I'd be very hard pressed that again, like I said, take a probiotic and that's going to fix it. I may do that, but I may also not expect that we're going to see tremendous effect from that, right? So I kind of tier that a little bit, and I have to meet people where they're at too, but I'm also going to push on a little level, right? So it's funny. I'll see mom, and she'll get better, and I'll see the kids, and then I'll see the grandparents, and then finally in comes the husband, right? Anyway, I got to do this so I can. And he'll be like this, right? Cross his arms, comes in. And so why are you here? Because my wife told me I need to be here, right? Okay, so that conversation's going to be a little bit different than what I had with, mom and kids and grandparents and that kind of thing. Maybe we're just going to say, eating McDonald's 5 times a week, not a good choice. Maybe just go to Chipotle, right? And again, that's working where he's at to move that forward, right? And again, he may not have any specific GI problems, but if I see somebody really sick, People that are really sick are really motivated to make changes. So this is the idea that then I'm going to do more. And again, it's what you can do, and do we know that this is making a difference? And I would say generally, I mean, I use supplements. I think supplements are very helpful, but they're Band-Aids, right? They're not fixing the problem. They may support things, and it may be that there's things that you need to be on long term, but fundamentally we want to deal with the ground floor of the pyramid, right? And that's hygiene stuff. Like, what are the choices that you're making every day, and what are some things that you can do to change that? And are you willing to do an elimination diet? Do we need to do a FODMAP diet? Do we need to do these kinds of things? Because I can be very aggressive. But again, it ends up that, all my patients, it's what we call an N of 1. So an N of 1 means that we've done a research trial, a clinical trial. An N of 1 means there's one person in the trial, you, right? And I have to work with that one person that I'm dealing with, instead of say, oh, well, the research says this, and the research may say that, and I may find that useful, but I still got to apply that in a one-to-one setting, an N of 1 setting. So that's the kind of the art versus the science part. Like, we don't want to ignore the science, but we still have to appreciate that there's an art piece to this. So.
Absolutely. That's a great response. One of our audience members has a very relatable question, because I think that this is sort of a prevalent issue. And this person says when they go on vacation or travel, they tend to have constipation for 4 or 5 days, no matter how much water they drink or what they eat. After those days, the system returns to normal. I eat my normal / typical foods during travel and continue taking my vitamins and drinking my coffee. What could be causing this, and what can I do to help unclog my system when I travel?
Yeah. So part of this is you can just travel halfway across the country too. You don't even need to go to Mexico. But anytime you go to another environment, you're going to come in contact with the commensal bacteria that's in that region. Right. And we talk about Montezuma's revenge when we go to Mexico and people get sick. That's because that bacteria may be even more different. But anywhere you go outside of that, you're going to start seeing things. You're going to get bacteria in your food, right? You can't be completely, not see anything. So you're going to start to kind of adapt to that. So that's part of that. I mean, so that's one possibility. It's also that, is there just kind of this change in motility that happens too, right? So just kind of like when there's change and sort of that gut motility may kind of slow down too, right? So even though you do fiber, you drink water, you do these kinds of things, it's really, I mean, I think just good hygiene traveling is to take a probiotic, just whatever one you can take, just to say, hey, I'm going to see things that are somewhat different that may somehow still take my body some time to adapt to. I mean, of course, you can do things that are more laxative, right? So you could take magnesium, there's other laxatives on the market to try to move that bowel, and again, I like to make sure you're having a regular bowel movement, but if it's 3 or 4 days that happens, is it something that you're going to say, hey, I'm going to do something to push this, knowing that within 3 to 5 days it'll be gone and then I don't need to do it any longer, right? Then I'm not so concerned. But if this is something that lingers, then using laxatives or something just to move that may not be the best idea, right? Because the laxatives don't address the cause of the problem.
A Band-Aid, right?
Yeah,
It's
Band-Aid. A strong Band-Aid too, right? So, and again, there's various levels of laxatives that are on the market, some that are gentler, some that are stronger. But, I still think it's really important to have a bowel movement. I would just like it to be that you have it on your own. But if this is a 3-day thing, then maybe that's something that, we know the pattern, right? So this is somebody that this always happens, right? This is how I am. Okay, so what are some, ideas, suggestions to work with that?
That's so interesting, Paul. I've never heard of that. I've never even considered that, when we're in a different climate or, just a different environment entirely, like we're adapting to different bacteria.
Oh yeah, there's different bacteria everywhere, right? I mean,
Right,
that's just what it is. I mean, our microbiome is somewhat reflective of where we live as well as our general health status. So I think if I
Wow.
look in my crystal ball, we worry about trying to, type our microbiome and say, what do you need to do that? But I think it's going to be the other way around, like it's a fingerprint. Like you could look at your microbiome and say, hey, the more resilient, whatever, and again, I'm using this word kind of loosely. But the more resilient bacteria that we have, and there are the broader spectrum bacteria we have, is going to mean that your health is stronger. Not so much that we can go in there and influence that, but that's now reflecting to us that things are good or things aren't good, right? Or your
Sure.
immune system may not be out of balance. And instead of saying, oh, we'll just take this probiotic, well, what are the other hygiene things you can do to kind of create that balance? And then can we look at that microbiome and say, wow, it's healthier because quote unquote, you're healthier, right? I mean, we live in this symbiosis. I mean, in our gastrointestinal tract, I mean, there's billions of bacteria there, and they play a really important role in that immune system and other things too. And they sense things that are going on, and they'll tell the body, hey, there's this happening, or there's this happening. Be warned, right? And anyway, so it's like a fingerprint is what I think.
That is fascinating. Really, that's truly fascinating. And with that, Patricia wants to know, and this kind of dovetails with the question that I sort of had in the back of my mind. She says, if someone isn't really sick, so I'm guessing if someone doesn't have a chronic disease or have any major issues, what would be a healthy pattern of eating and supplement taking to kind of maintain that baseline of health? So I guess what I would want to know, and this is similar to Patricia's question, like what Paul Ratte, what you've been studying this for so long, what are some just general pro tips that you've learned over the years in terms of, maybe we should just as a species stay away from this and eat more of that and do more of this and do more of that to maintain a healthy microbiome, thus just overall whole body health? Does that make sense?
Sure. So again, being a naturopathic doctor, I mean, it's almost like I learn about gut function, I learn about liver function. So it's almost like I have a really good understanding of the function of the gastrointestinal tract, of detoxification pathways, this kind of thing. And these are things that conventional medicine doesn't do so well with, just because there's not diseases. Like we already talked about that with irritable bowel, for example, but that's also with the liver. The liver is such an important organ, yet you can beat it up, right? And just like I said with your GI tract, you can just do things and you're like, hey, that's fine, I'm good to go. Why would I worry about this? Whereas you can't beat up your thyroid gland, you can't beat up your heart, you can't beat up your kidneys. So the liver and the gastrointestinal tract, really, really important. And that's, I talked earlier about that enterohepatic circulation, right? So that's that gut and the liver. So the liver kind of doing the cleanup work in the body, and it secretes bile. And that bile has this, it helps digest fat. And then it kind of, fights out with the microbiome, and that fighting actually makes the microbiome stronger, right? So they don't necessarily get along, right? They're not kissing cousins, they're like fighting cousins, right? They're trying for the same resource, but that's actually a good thing, right? And the bile doesn't stay there. So from my perspective, I think that we live in an environment where we are just, inundated with toxins in the environment. And again, it's not that everybody has a problem with those, but they're just part of industrialization, right? We've concentrated these toxins and they're in our environment. And the idea is, so doing things to make sure that we're have good GI function as well as good liver function. So I talked about bitter herbs a little bit, like the Swedish bitters. So there's different herbs that are out there that can kind of work both kind of in upper GI as well as kind of improving that liver function, right? So milk thistle, for example, is an example of a herb that's safe. It's growing in your backyard. It's a weed, right? But it's really beneficial for kind of improving liver function or helping the liver, right? Supporting the liver. Whereas it's also got a little bit of bitter principle too, so it can kind of engage that GI tract, right? So, I mean, I'm not a big multivitamin guy, right? So, I mean, you take a multivitamin, I'm not opposed to that, but rarely do I see I take a multivitamin and I'm better because I take a multivitamin. That's like just, again, another low-grade insurance policy. I'd say I'm a little bit more interested in trying to work on function in the body. And then if you need a multivitamin, I'd say, well, do you need a fat-soluble vitamin? Do you need trace minerals, right? So I kind of would separate that out in how I look at that. Now, unless somebody's deficient, then they would see a benefit from taking a multivitamin. But, this culture of ours, I don't see a lot of scurvy. I don't see a lot. I mean, I've never seen scurvy. I've never seen beriberi. These are classic nutritional deficiencies, right? You're deficient in vitamin C, you're deficient in thiamine, and we have this manifestation of that. So the thing is, that's not what we're dealing with in our life right now. We're dealing with excess. We're dealing with too much. We're dealing with too many calories. We're dealing with too many refined carbohydrates. We're dealing with too many toxins in the environment. So we just want to do things that are hygienic to improve that function. And I would say that's kind of liver support. You know, I made a mention of that, as well as things to make sure that GI tract's working, right? So I want a bowel movement every day, right? If you don't have a bowel movement every day, I mean, we can talk about fiber. I'm a fan of fiber, but fiber alone may not fix it. That we need to engage that upper GI, bitters, digestive enzymes, you know, that kind of thing. But I'm a big bitter guy, right? I love bitters, bitter herbs, bitter things. They're really stimulating that upper GI. Like not fat, salt, sweet. Like we're so addicted to fat, salt, sweet.
Right.
Not even addicted. That's what's in our food chain, and the food industry knows
Right.
it. That's the
Right.
way they're able to preserve foods, and the way they're able to deliver foods. And then that's what we're used to. And then we don't get used to all these different flavors, right? All these different sour and bitter and
Sure.
spicy and these kinds of things, which are going to have beneficial effects in that GI tract, right? But we kind of
Oh, you said
turn it
spicy,
off.
Paul. That's kind of, I mean, I think a lot of people associate that with digestive issues, but there's benefit to eating spicy. Is that what you were saying? In addition
Well, right.
to
So
bitter
again,
and
just the
sour?
idea that getting that wide spectrum
Yeah,
of tastes and things, right? So
right.
spicy, absolutely. If there's reflux issues, that may make that worse. But
Sure.
understand that you take the spicy away, it's treating the symptom, but it's not treating the cause, right? So the idea is, why are you got heart, you know, why do you have stomach acid in the wrong place, right? Which is basically, it's in, you know, it's refluxed up into your esophagus, and you're like, I need to make that go away. Yeah, but why is that happening? And stomach acid is something that we make. Our body makes it. It's not coming from outside. And then we go in there and we want to block it. And blocking it will help, but it's, again, that's using a Band-Aid that's not helping the body heal itself. You're just trying to make the symptom go away. And there's a time and a place to treat the symptom, but there's also a time and a place to say, hey, how do I support function?
Sure. Dr. Ratte, there is an audience member that says they have been diagnosed with GAVE, gastric antral vascular ectasia, and GERD. They want to know if you have any suggestions. Please don't say yogurt. I can't even handle chocolate pudding.
So again, I'm really interested in that upper GI. So we want to make sure that there's engagement and movement through that GI tract, right? So again, this is focusing on upper rather than lower. When we focus on lower, that's kind of where the microbiome is. We go to the stomach, there's really no bacteria there. And you think about it, that hydrochloric acid has a pH of 0.8, right? You do the high school experiments with HCl, and you got to wear gloves, right? You can burn a hole in your skin, but yet we make that in our GI tract, so our stomach can withstand it. Stomach can get worn down, right? We can lose some of that lining in that stomach, or the mucus layer goes away, and then that starts to bother us. But then we need to engage that. We need to break down that protein. We need to break down the fats. We need to break down these foods in the upper GI and then absorb them in the small intestine. And then the large intestine is really just elimination. So the large intestine is kind of where that sensing's going on, most of the microbiome. But we're not talking microbiome when we talk the stomach, right? Completely different. And this is where we talk about the gut is kind of the second brain. You've probably heard that. You know, I'm always interested, like maybe it's the first brain, right? So how many times do you say, well, trust your gut, right? So that, again, the
Sure.
idea is that we just have that, we have a lot of sensing and information that's being transacted across that gastrointestinal tract, because so many things are going on there that we have to figure out, what are we keeping, what are we removing, what do we allow in, how small does it, how much do we need to break it down before we allow it in? And we just, again, like I said, take it for granted. We're just like, oh, that's how it works. And again, we want that good movement through there, and we want that engagement on that. And, you know, changing foods and eating foods that are more digestible may be helpful, but part of that too is, how do I make that GI tract stronger and kind of engage that? So again, like I said, I love those bitter herbs and things that may engage that. And you can use really strong bitters, you can use really weak bitters, and you can actually take bitters and you can combine them with ginger, for example. So bitters tend to be very cold. Ginger tends to be warming. So ginger also has some effects to help that GI tract. So again, now we can get into this kind of balancing between these things, balancing almost, you'd say, the flavors of the herbs, right? Not fat, salt, sweet, but the bitter, the pungent. That's what we see with ginger, that those can have very beneficial effects. Turmeric is another one, right? Turmeric's really popular right now. Turmeric's in the same family as ginger. It has that same kind of warming effect, right? Turmeric is a little bit specific to the liver too. So that's something that can engage both the GI tract and as well as improving liver function. So those are kinds of things that I look at, from a therapeutic level that you can use to try to help engage that.
Sure. Sarah wants to know, Paul, you had mentioned chemo earlier and how that can, impact the GI system in detrimental ways. Her mother starts chemo in a week. Are there things that you would suggest? This is a great question. Are there things that you would suggest she does in preparation or once she's going through it?
So I think what's really important is make sure that that she gets nutrition, right? I mean, that's just some level, because it's very common for when chemo goes on and people are like, I'm not hungry, I don't want to eat. And it's because partly due to the fact that we've just affected that GI tract, and just finding foods that are, whether that's pre-digested, whether that's making smoothies, and make sure there's enough protein in there, and making sure there's kind of a battle plan to say, how do I stay, nutritionally balanced and maintain that nutrition from that, because malnutrition is very, very common in cancer patients. And the idea is that we don't necessarily see it right away, right? I mean, if you went a week and didn't eat, you wouldn't necessarily be malnourished yet, right? It takes time for that to happen, right? So that protein, we don't even necessarily need all those essential amino acids on a daily level, but we need them like every other day, right? So there's that semblance that the body has some resources it can work on, right? That it has resources to tap on if it needs to, but then you start to deplete that. And we want to make sure we're not depleting that, right? We want to make sure that people are there ready to fight the battle, right? Because that chemo is it's like war. Cancer is a war, right? I mean, it's your immune system you can't determine that these cancer cells are bad and they've kind of established their little fortress. And now we got to have this conversation about, do we need to kill it? Yeah, well, the chemo may kill it, but we also want to build up the resources, right? That's having the nutrition, supporting the immune function, that kind of thing. And that's kind of behind the scenes, and that's not really what oncologists are, focusing on, right? I mean, they want to make sure that people aren't anemic and we don't see low white blood cells and that kind of thing, but we want to make sure that we're supporting all those functions the best we can.
Sure, being more proactive, um, be more intentional with your choices. This got me thinking, Paul, like I make a smoothie every day just because I like the taste of it and I tell myself it's healthy, but I don't know for sure. It's good. And I feel like I've mastered it over the past several months. It's a couple of bananas. I've got an avocado in there. I dump in turmeric. I dump in cinnamon. I put some hemp hearts or flaxseed in there, collagen, and a little bit of honey to sweeten it up, like local, unpasteurized stuff, and grind it all together. And it's amazing. But is too much of a good thing a bad thing? Like if I'm throwing everything in there but the kitchen sink, am I even going to see any value, or do some of those on a chemical level fight each other?
Yeah, I don't think they fight each other. So put it this way, why I get interested in it is, at the very least, are you putting all food items into that smoothie, right? Is everything in that smoothie food? We get in that collagen thing, right? Because that collagen now is a powder, and it's some magic protein powder that's going to build your joint space. I'm not opposed to that, right? But it's not really a real food, let's say, but it's not completely fake. But that's this is the idea that, oh, well, I can't eat protein, so I'm going to get it in this easy form that I'm going to be able to put in a smoothie.
Sure.
So it's better than nothing, and it's certainly better than other choices you could make, right? But I still like that idea of, how much of that is real food, right? So
Sure.
the
Sure.
collagen, I mean, I could say you could, take chicken feet and brew your, make your soup stock out of chicken feet and then put
Sure.
that in your smoothie. But then
Sure.
you'll be like, I don't want to drink that. I mean, I don't know,
But we
right? I
call
mean,
it bone
I'm
broth,
not
you
saying that's
know?
bad. I'm just saying that still, I mean, smoothies fit our lifestyle, right? We like it. It's quick, it's easy. I
Mhm.
drink it, it's gone,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And again, if there's digestive problems, that may be a way to bypass it, right? You've
sure.
blended it up, right? But then the other aspect is, do I actually want to engage that digestive system? It's
Mm,
funny. We use about 10 to 15% of our energy to digest food. So think about that we want to increase our energy we want to increase our energy usage, right? Specifically, if we're talking about weight loss, for example. So part of that energy is used to digest food. You've heard the celery diet, where you go on celery and you only eat celery and you lose weight
celery
because you
juice.
spend more energy digesting the celery than you get from the celery. So it puts you at a negative caloric balance, which is what people want. So
Oh,
that's the idea, that that digestive system we want to engage it, and smoothies
sure,
don't necessarily engage that so much, but
sure.
maybe better than doing nothing. That being said, unless you're intermittent fasting and you want to intermittent fast, and you'd be like, well, maybe I need to skip breakfast, right? And that's a whole nother can of worms, right?
Yeah,
But generally we eat too much in this culture, right? I mean, we eat a lot of meat, we eat frequently, and we end up eating too much.
yeah,
And again, too much for one person may not be too much for somebody else, right? Very
right,
hard to make general statements, but just
right.
the idea that eating less would be a good thing, but
Okay.
not the chemo patient, right? Then we
Right,
see weight loss that's bad weight loss, because then we see muscle mass being lost, right? So
sure,
again, it's always this N of one, right?
right. Maddie wants to know what your thoughts are on using essential oils internally for digestive purposes.
So essential oils, I'm really, I would say I would be very respectful of the fact that those are really strong medicines, right? So when you use essential oils, they're very strong. They can be toxic. So I would say that you're using drop dosing, and I would say basically diluted in other things too, right? So I'm very careful from the internal use of those things. But the whole idea is that you want that smell, you want that because that's engaging different parts of your digestive system. Just understand that a little bit may be really good, but more is not necessarily better, right? I am always straying on the end of start really low, and if you need a little bit more, then gradually increase it rather than starting at a really strong dose. So
Sure,
I'm very
sure.
appreciative of the potential toxicity with essential oils.
Okay, so ease into it. Um,
Yeah, and there's essential oils really good in that remove phase, for example, right? So if we're trying to like kill bad bacteria or something like that, essential oils can be very effective for that. But we still want to be respectful of that it's not just more is better.
Paul, again, this might be an open-ended question, but how do you know if you're maintaining, you're talking about bad bacteria, and when I had that issue 10, 12 years ago, it's because I took an antibiotic that was too powerful for my system, and it wiped out all the good stuff and I was left with the bad stuff. And it took a long time to kind of recompile all of that. But how do you know um, if the good and the bad is offset? You've got too much of one thing, or is that even a thing, I guess? And what do
Yeah,
you
we never really know, right? So the way that I kind of look at that is the body won't lie to you. The question is whether you're actually listening to your body or not listening to your body, right? So if we really look at this, for example, my intake form, I ask a whole bunch of digestive questions, right? Because I'm like really trying to be nitpicky. That is there not something going on? Because I may even ask you, so do you have any GI issue? Oh, no, I'm fine, right? Or how often do you have a bowel movement? And that may tell me something, right? But it's really taking an inventory of saying, okay, here's all these things that could be going on, or do I notice things? And again, from a digestive level, then it's like, do you eat and you notice, hey, I get these symptoms after I eat, or I feel a little worse, or sometimes I feel better, right? If you feel bad all the time, you may not know that, right? Versus if you sometimes feel bad and sometimes feel better, and then we look and say, well, does that have something to do with the digestive tract, right? And again, I mean, I'm biased, right? I'm biased. Somebody comes to see me, I'm thinking gut, I'm thinking liver. Like I want to rule those out before I look at other things. So I really take a hard look at that to make sure. Now, are you sure, right? There's nothing going on, and this kind of thing. But for the most part, there's the gastrointestinal tract is basically going to tell you things. And again, because we don't, eat and then we don't eat, that we may get some idea or some suggestion from that, whether it's related, right? And again, I'd say autoimmune issues, lots of other thing. I always look at the gastrointestinal tract, right? Because that's that first line of defense. And if things aren't happy in your GI tract, that can often lead to inflammatory things in other parts of the body too, where people say, well, I don't have any GI problems. Well, you don't have any GI problems. Let's go through the list and make sure, right? So that kind of thing. Food sensitivities being another one. Like people are like, oh, well, I don't have a problem with gluten. Well, I don't know. Have you ever taken gluten out for a period of time? And I say no gluten, and then put it back in and then see, do I have an issue when I do this? Right. Whereas,
Right.
you know, we tend in this culture to eat dairy and gluten and corn and these kinds of things on a regular basis, that we're never at a point that we haven't had those to have a clear sense like, wow, that really
Sure.
affects me.
Sure.
Right. That's
Yeah.
kind of this
It's such a niche
elimination
part
then
of our
challenge diet.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is hard to do, right? I mean, elimination and challenge, but really it's getting you in tune with how's my digestive tract doing, right? Where, and then you're like, wow, you know, like for me, I go to Japan, I'm like, wow, really? Like I never knew I had a problem. And then it's this idea that, but it's, you know, something changed from that perspective, right? But if you're being deliberate about it and you do an elimination diet, you say, okay, I'm going to do this for 4 weeks. I'm going to see if there's any difference here. Well, I did it and I didn't notice any difference. Okay. I mean, I'm going to believe you. I'm not going to tell you to take gluten because everybody shouldn't eat gluten. Many people tolerate gluten, and we've been eating gluten as humans for 10,000 years. It's nothing new in our food chain.
Sure.
So we processed it and done lots of bad things in the United States that I think makes it more problematic, but you know.
For sure. And Paul, while we're talking about trying to kind of find that balance, it got me thinking, you know, in these COVID times, we're so much more apt to antibacterial everything and wash our hands. And I mean, that's a good thing that we're washing our hands probably, hopefully more than ever. But how do we find that balance of trying to, you know, stay clean and clear of any incoming germs while also allowing our bacteria to just naturally grow and kind of collect?
All right, so I'll share a little, here's my story on this, maybe that tells it. So the problem is not on the skin per se, right? The skin was well developed and designed to not let bacteria in, right? So we can see Staphylococcus aureus, we can see all sorts of things on our skin, but it's not in our body. So I've every year gone to this teaching conference. It's been in December, and it's down at the, you know, the hotel downtown, right? I go there every year, right? And I've noticed, and the thing is, it's education, right? So all educationals from all over Minnesota are there. High school teachers, I don't know if there's grade school teachers, but probably some grade school teachers, right? It's kind of educational technology. So there's a lot of different people that are bringing everything from where they've been, from whatever school district they're in, right? And they come, and I've noticed every time I go, I end up getting sick afterwards. Right? I'll get like whatever. And my sickness, you know, I'm down for a day or two, but it's like every time I'm like, wow, you know, there's something to this. And I know the problem is, it's not what's on my hands, it's if I'm putting what's in my hand into my body. And do you know what the best way to put something on my hands that I've touched and put it in my body? You know the best way to do that? Touch your eye.
Yeah, I do that.
So you go rub your eye, right? Or you rub your nose. Your nose, not so much. Your mouth, even not so much. But your eyes, you don't have any lining there. Right. So here's my little experiment. I said, okay, I'm going to this conference this year. Now I've done it twice, right? I've been there twice since. And I'm going to be extremely careful. I am not going to touch my face. So I probably missed a lot of things in the conference because all I'm thinking about is not touching my face. I'm like sitting on my hands, being very deliberate. Right. Yeah, and I can touch that escalator, right? I touch that escalator, right? To hold on when I'm riding the escalator. I just shared whatever it is on my skin. But I didn't wear gloves or anything, right? I didn't go that far. And I'm not a clean freak at all, right? But the idea is I did not touch my face. So for 2 years I've done that, no sickness.
Wow.
Right? I've not gotten sick afterwards. Now that's anecdotal. But I'd say I've seen this before, right? So the idea is that we want to clean it on our skin so we're okay when we touch our eyes.
Sure.
Don't touch your eyes.
Sure. Sure.
Don't allow that in per se,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And again, there's also resiliency to that too, right? So resiliency is this idea that I can touch my eye and I get the bacteria and it's not such a bad deal. But again, I'm in there with educators from all over the state. I'm
Mhm.
like, it's like going to childcare, right? If you want,
Yeah.
you take your kids to childcare and, wow, that's a great way to build your immune system by sharing everything that every child has, right? And that's not necessarily bad, but it's also, we got overkill on that, right? And that's the same thing with
Right.
COVID, right? So
Right.
how resilient are we to be able to maintain that? And I mean, my opinion, this is purely my opinion, I don't have any research to back this up, is to say a healthy microbiome is going to be very protective for COVID, right?
Sure.
But I think that goes across, for anything. I mean, we talk about any virus or any other situation too, right?
Yeah. The eye
Make you
touching
more resilient to it.
the eye touching thing has got me thinking about, I feel like without fail, anytime that I come home from travel, I get sick. And I'm like, oh, I've, washed my hands umpteen times and I've, it's got to be, and I'm a face toucher. So I'm sure it's the eye thing, especially as women, we wear mascara, we wear eye makeup.
Oh,
Sometimes that gets in the eye and it's impossible to just let it work itself out on its own. So we're in there, so that's just something that's really important to be mindful of. And it totally makes sense when you think about we've seen pictures in the media over the past year of patients being treated in COVID units, and those healthcare professionals are wearing not just, the spacesuits, but they've got the goggles on too to protect their eyes.
yeah, I wonder, we talk about the, eyes being the window to the soul, but they're also the window to your immune system, right? They
Right.
go right in because you don't have protection there. It's not designed. Your nose and your mouth more so, right? I mean, you're used to getting bacteria there. Not that you can't get it that way too, you can.
Yeah.
But your skin, it's not going to get through your skin. It's
Right.
where you're going to put that, where you're going to put your fingers is the problem.
Yes. I think we've got time for one last question here, Paul, and it's from Sarah. She wants to know, what about GI support pills that are, I think she's looking for a recommendation, that are offered by certain companies? Are they helpful to take when feeling bloated after eating? Or would you suggest some type of a whole food instead of a supplement/pill?
So I'm always going to recommend a food over a supplement, but again, it depends on what we're dealing with, right? So the idea being that supplements are useful. So supplements can get you from point A to point B really quickly, right? Maybe not like a drug, but still something that if you're not digesting well, you're bloated after you eat, you take a digestive enzyme and you're like, wow, that's better, right? I don't experience that bloating, but why are you bloating? Is it because you have a lack of pancreatic enzymes or because you're eating dairy products that you don't tolerate, right? So, I mean, this is the idea to try to look at this and say, what is the pattern of this, right? So if we're looking at a specific symptom, I mean, I'm always interested, like, when does that happen? Is it there all the time, like whether you eat or you don't eat? Or if it's, bloating or whatever, we say here it happened, and then yesterday it didn't happen, and today it happened, and then I'd be like, okay, well, what did you eat, right? What was different in that time frame to say that this made a difference on it? Well, I'll just take a digestive enzyme and I won't worry about it. Well, again, if you're sensitive to dairy, for example, you take the digestive enzyme that helps that, you're not quote unquote fixing the problem, and you're just putting the Band-Aid on. And is it long, you just keep putting a Band-Aid on, it's fine. But then I'd be like, yeah, probably dairy's not your best choice, right? I'm lactose intolerant, right? That was my big deal going to Japan. I don't eat any dairy, and that makes a huge difference for me, right? So lactose intolerance means I can take my dairy pill, right? I could take my lactase pill, which means I'm taking an enzyme to break down dairy, to break down the carbohydrate in dairy. And I'd be like, oh, I can eat ice cream, right? So I can be like, oh, no problem. I can eat whatever dairy I want. Just take my pill. I really shouldn't be eating that, right? I don't tolerate it real well. I have the enzyme as a backup, but that's not like my primary to say, oh, I can go do whatever I want, right? But I'm also very cognizant of the fact that dairy and I are not good friends. And if I want to do that, I can do that and I can stray, but certain things I can stray on more than I can on others, right? But that's just, again, my N of one. But lactose intolerance really common, right? So this is extremely common that a lot of people, I mean, the numbers are like 7 out of 10 Americans have some semblance of lactose intolerance. And it may be so mild that you don't even know that there's a symptom there, right? But it's
Mm,
something that, wow, you do it for time and over time. And I'll tell you, the digestive system does not get better with age, right? Not like fine wine.
right.
It's
Right.
worse, right? So it's harder to do this. It's harder for us to maintain that hydrochloric acid. It's harder to maintain these things. So as we age, we really need to, show some respect and maybe potentially support. But again, I'm going to say diet is always first. It's just, keeping a dietary really important, right? Is what I ask my patients, is to write down what you eat and write down how you feel, right? I need the what you feel part, right? Not just how many calories are you eating and how many carbohydrates are you eating, but really, how you're feeling. And if you have a symptom and you have it here and you don't have it there, then I'm going to look at that. Well, what did you
Yeah.
eat before that? So it's
Yeah.
detective work, right? So
I think that's just
I'm
a
a food detective.
general best practice for anyone. Like you said, it's good to kind of like stop yourself in your tracks and discover what is irritating your stomach before it becomes a chronic issue. I
Yeah, and
just
your
think,
body will not lie to you. If you're listening
yeah,
to it and you're
right.
being honest with it, you may want to ignore it, but and again, it may just tap you on the shoulder or it may hit you upside the head, right? And it's like, when am I going to listen to it? When it hits me upside the head. But if it's
Oh,
tapping on you, pay
yeah,
attention to the tapping before it hits you on the side of the head, right?
these
I'm
are great.
interested in doing things before they become worse.
Right. Dr. Ratte, you were just so awesome. I could talk to you forever. But time is a
You
thing.
tell that to my wife, right? I'll leave with this. I can tell you that I'm married to an acupuncturist, and I
Oh,
got a
okay.
lot more acupuncture before we were married, right? But she gets a
Okay.
lot more dietary advice now that we're married.
Oh no, is it solicited or
And I can
unsolicited?
tell you, unsolicited dietary advice does not equal marital bliss.
Oh, you're just looking out for her, right, Paul? That's
That's right. Nope. Yes, dear.
happy wife, happy life.
That's
Dr.
right.
McKay, thank you so much for your time. We've been wanting to talk to you for a very long time, and I'm thinking back again to sort of the canon of articles that we've produced together, under this Be Well umbrella over the past 3 years, and it's just so great to put a face to the name, so people get more familiarized with these experts that Northwestern claims. So thanks again,
Great.
Paul, for being a guest. I'm thinking we'll probably do another post. I'm thinking about hygiene. I'm thinking about the R's. I'm thinking about upper versus lower. Like, I've got a lot of stuff that I need to get out of here and put on paper. For the rest of you,
Great.
don't worry if you missed anything during this past hour. If you want to hear something again, because Paul is just such a fountain of knowledge, we will be posting a recording of this very webinar on the Wellness Wednesday landing page, and that should be up within the next couple of days or so. So stay tuned on that. While you're there, make sure to check out our upcoming schedule of topics. Next month is going to be really cool because we're talking about the kind of the evolution of integrative medicine and how East is starting to integrate more into West, and West is sort of embracing and accepting that more and encouraging it more. So I'll be talking to sort of both sides of the coin and how much progress we've made in complementary medicine. Again, major thanks to Paul Ratte for his gift of knowledge and gift of time. And last but not least, we want to thank Northwestern Health Sciences University for sponsoring this awesome series. And don't forget to sign up, and our door is always open. So let us know what you want to hear about in the natural healthcare realm. Thanks, everybody. Thanks,
Great.
Paul.
Thanks,
Take
Jamie.
care.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.